I had a really good question in the mindful movement session the other day, and they asked, what do I do if the client, when they are about to squat, they don't tuck their hips, they just shove forward. So it looks like this. So whether it's assisted squat, goblet squat, you have them or cue them to tuck their hips underneath them, but instead of doing that, they just end up shoving forward. So how do I fix that? One way is allowing someone to hinge back before they squat. So when someone squats, I don't want them to hinge back. I cue hips down. But if you think about it, you're asking them to drive hip extension from a position of almost terminal hip extension. So if someone doesn't have access to that motion, if they can't do this with their hips, then they have no option but to shove forward, and that's their way of trying. So if you buy them a little bit of motion by hinging back, you're now putting the hips more in a position of flexion. So you're going to be able to drive hip extension from a position of flexion a little better than driving hip extension from a position of hip extension that the person might not have access to. So if you hinge them back a hair, and there, always demo in front of them. So from that position, pull the back pockets down, and then see if that works. And then work your way into driving the knees forward, making it look more like a squat. The other thing is, maybe it's just too much and they can't understand that cue in the standing position. So a couple ways you can help the client differentiate between untucking and tucking, because if they can get those two, then hopefully they can transfer that competency in those cues to other exercises. So a really good way to learn that is all fours. And I call this a less exaggerated cat-cow or quadruped tucking. So instead of the whole spine moving, I give clients something to pay attention here. As they exhale, they untuck the hips, and as they inhale, they tuck the tailbone. And I tell them that only the hips move. So to really pay attention in differentiating between untucking and tucking, untucking and tucking. So my hope there is, in that process, the purpose of that is literally to train themselves to differentiate between tucking and untucking. So when I ask them to do it in a more difficult activity, hopefully they're able to do it. So here, to untuck or tuck, and then untuck. And that's back and forth with that. You can also practice tucking in a half kneeling position. Have them shift forward a little bit. For the same reason, in a standing position, shifting forward buys you a little extra motion. So from that position, pull the back pocket down. This position, you might see the shoving forward as well. That might be because they don't have access to hip extension or driving that, or just out of habit because a lot of people will do that stretch where they shove forward. So a good way to coach people out of that is I have people hinge back. I have them touch the front of their hip, and from there I tell them, don't allow your hip to push into your hand as you pull the back pocket down. This can give you a good idea if the person's even capable of doing that before you ask them to do it in a standing position. Another way you could work on it as well is tall kneeling. Get a little wider than hip width apart. Just a tiny bit. You could hold on to something, or you can just lean forward. And same thing, you're practicing pulling the back pockets down and then untucking, and then pulling the back pockets down and then untucking, and you're not shoving forward into the front of your hip. And you could even try it as soon as you do a few rounds of that, go back into your squat and say the same thing you just practiced. Soften your knees, pull the back pockets down, and then squat down.